Ba-da-ba, 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 ba-ba, boo. Wow. As you can guess by the image, we're going to talk a little Jets Giants right now. I just got to throw this out there. Like, I mean, week by week, we've been watching these teams do their thing, and the Jets and the Giants have had they've punched both of them have punched above their weight for most of this season, right? I don't think there's any question about that. I think if you look at the Jets, if you look at the Giants, they've punched above their weight. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in a league that is so competitive. A league that statistically there have been more one possession games in this NFL season than in the history of the NFL. So this is the most competitive the NFL has ever been. So there's nothing wrong with having teams like the Jets and the Giants happen to be at the same time, happen to be in the same building, same region. There's nothing wrong with them both being in a spot where they both were not predicted to do anything and they're both doing a lot. But here's where we run into a problem. The NFC East and the AFC East are both better than predicted. So being as good as they've been may not be good enough to even make the playoffs, let alone, to hang on to an upper tier spot. In other years, both of these teams would be in first place comfortably in their divisions, especially the NFC. I mean, the NFC East has been terrible for a while. The AFC East is better this year than it's been, but it was never as bad as the NFC East, which has been a toilet division for a long time. We've had teams from that division barely 500 that have been able to win the division. Now that's not going to be good enough. So I guess we could start with that. Everybody this year has pretty much conceded if there's a difference between the Jets and the Giants, it's simple, right? The Jets have more high-end talent. They have more explosive high-end talent. The Garrett Wilsons, Breece Hall before he got hurt, Mosley, Lawson, Reed, Whitehead, and of course Sauce Gardner, right? I mean, if you look at the Jets, you can name players. It's high-end talent. The Giants, their upper tier talent, unfortunately, they've had some guys get hurt. They had Tony was an explosive player, but didn't seem like he fit in with the culture, and he was always injured. They let him go. And he got hurt this weekend, by the way, so he continues his storyline. Wan'Dale Robinson just got hurt this weekend. He was an unknown going into the season, so no one really thought of him in that way, but they thought he had potential. But if you look at the rest of the Giants, basically Saquon Barkley, Leonard Williams, they have a couple guys, Dexter Lawrence, but really, like, when you think about the totality of the Giants, the strength has been that they have a lot of hardworking players, good depth, and great coaching and management. So the Jets, talent-wise, that's how they got to this spot. The Giants, you could argue a little bit more lunch pail, a little bit more based on the coaching. They have probably the coach of the year. In my mind, Daboll's coach of the year still. Even though I didn't like Adoree Jackson returning punts, but that's another story. Now let's get to what happened this weekend. Frankly, there's going to be a lot of people, and I heard this on Tiki and Tierney, on The Fan, and I've heard it from a lot of people. This was the reality check, and this is the end of the season. It's the end of the road, the end of the gravy train. I don't know if it is or it isn't, frankly. I don't think, if you look at the Jets, when they lost that game to the Patriots 2 weeks ago, they came out and beat the Bills. To me, that showed when I think it's over, it's not over. Now, are the Giants going to go out and beat Dallas in Dallas? I don't think so, only because I think the Giants situation is different now. So I'll start with them. The Giants have finally hit a point where I think they can't overcome the injuries. They've been doing it all year, but I think this is probably the end of the road. And the reason I'm saying that is because the Giants have, when they lost Wan'Dale Robinson for the year now, and they lost Adoree Jackson for 4 to 6 weeks. They still don't have Xavier McKinney for the rest of probably the rest of the season, if not another couple weeks. Bellinger's not there. I mean, they already were thinner talent-wise, and they've had to go way down and dig down deep into undrafted free agents, practice squad players, picking up players who got cut. I mean, they got a receiving core that you can't name half their guys, right? Between Hodges and David Sills, and I mean, it's just like a bunch of no names. It's going to be even more so. Richie James is going to have to play a lot now because without Wando Robinson, I mean, Galladay, James, Hodges, and Sills, those are your receivers. Hudson is your tight end. Nobody knows who these guys are. I mean, these are the guys I run into at the deli when I go to get a sandwich. I mean, they're totally unknown. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a knock on them, but it's just the expectation going into the season, you know, now we're kind of hitting that point where it's like, all right, we just don't have the physical talent to compete with some of these other teams, like the Vikings, who they have to play still, like the Cowboys, they got to play again on Thursday, like the Eagles, who have been on fire this year, even though the last couple weeks the Eagles have faltered. So I think it's fair to say that the Giants may have finally hit the wall, because even with their coaching, even with their scouting and their management, this might be too much to overcome now injury-wise. For the Jets are in a different spot. The Jets have most of their high-end talent intact because the majority of that is on defense. Their offense has enough talent, except for that there's one position that is truly holding them back, and that is offensive coordinator and quarterback. I'm putting them together because I'm convinced the coach just doesn't know anything about offense, right? He knows how to stop offenses, but he doesn't know anything about producing offense. So that's the problem when you have a defensive coach and an inexperienced offensive coordinator who's proven nothing, and a quarterback who's a rook. So the only guy on the offensive side of the ball who's accomplished anything offensively is the third-string quarterback now, Joe Flacco. He's the only guy in the room who could say, I've done it. Nobody else has done it. Michael LaFleur hasn't done it, and obviously Zach Wilson hasn't done it. And, you know, Zach Wilson's producing offense for the other teams now. Now, he didn't turn the ball over, right? He didn't have a brutal interception, brutal strip sack, brutal whatever. He was just flat terrible. He was unproductive. He literally had, they had 6 yards of offense in the second half? 6 yards? I could get a high school team that could get more than 6 yards. You can get lucky on one play and break for 6 yards. 6 yards? The problem with the Jets is that the Jets have a upper tier elite defense, and it is criminal to waste their defense. Criminal. They can't afford to waste this defense. They can't afford it. The Jets would almost be better off from the management's perspective and from a PR perspective if they could say, hey, you know, if their defense wasn't actually this good, if their defense was a little worse, then they could say, well, you know, we're just not good enough anyway. We're building. It's a building process. They're not building anymore. They have a Super Bowl defense, and they have a craptacular offense. And it's mainly craptacular because the coordinator and the quarterback. You can't go to New England and lose that game. You can't go to New England and score no points. 3 points? You can't do that. I know the Patriots have a good team, but they can't afford. Just think of it. Let's put this in perspective, okay? Put this in perspective. The Giants outperform the Jets offensively. Okay? Who is playing offense for the Giants other than Barkley? If the Jets had Daniel Jones, the Jets are winning that game. And Daniel Jones may not be John Elway, but if Daniel Jones was on the Jets, he would have ran for 6 yards on one play. He would have hit someone on a slant. He would have done something. I mean, Zach Wilson played I thought the game against New England 2 weeks ago was the worst game of his career because he looked completely overwhelmed. I'm convinced yesterday was the worst game of his career now because he didn't look overwhelmed. He just looked incapable. That's a lot worse. If you're a young player, you get overwhelmed, it's not that you don't have the talent. What I saw yesterday, it looked like a lack of talent, an inability to overcome. And I got to look at the coach and the offensive coordinator and say, It doesn't mean we're done with Zach, but we have to win this game. We got to score some points. Put this other guy in there, Mike White. And let me just throw something out there also about Mike White and his controversy. They decided to lower Flacco for some reason. I wouldn't have done that. I don't know why. But why is it that Mike White is assumed to not be good enough because of 2 games? One game where he was great, another game when he was okay, and he got hurt. Why is it that we assume that because a guy's on a high draft pick that he can't play? Have you not seen examples of players who were not high draft picks who turned out to be good players? I mean, obviously, I could name Brady. That's low-hanging fruit. But even like a guy like a Tony Romo, he wasn't drafted. I mean, what about a Drew Brees? Drew Brees was basically told to go get a sandwich and walk. They told he couldn't throw. He had hurt his arm. He's like, you suck. We got Phillip Rivers now. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are not predicted to be something who turn out to be better than what they are. And I'm sorry, the Jets don't have a history of evaluation where they can turn around and say, we know what's best. Nobody believes that. But I'm not saying Mike White's the solution. But can Mike White get a look? I mean, is he going to be worse than Zach Wilson? And honestly, would Flacco be worse? I know the line isn't perfect, and they didn't have a great game yesterday, especially the second half. That wasn't great. But why can't you get Flacco in the ball game and let him at least manage the game to a victory? He can make 1 or 2 throws a game. Even Mike White, when he came in last year, 2 years ago, he could make a play or two. I just think this obsession with forcing Zach Wilson through. Zach Wilson might be capable. Zach Wilson might be the quarterback for the Jets. Just not today. Just not today. The Jets are not in position to allow Zach Wilson time to experiment and to grow. They're not in that position. They can't afford it. The Jets' defense is too good. The Jets have enough talent offensively that they should be able to come out and score enough points to win some of these games. And now you got another problem. You don't have a tiebreaker with New England. So if crappy New England, and they're not that good, if crappy New England gets to the end of the season and somehow you're tied with them for the last playoff spot, or you're tied with them for a higher seed for a home game at a playoffs or whatever, you're not breaking that tie. You needed to win this football game. And I hope Robert Saleh can cut the positive crap. I hope he can remount Zach. I mean, let's compare, right? Daniel Jones, first game of the year, throws an interception in the end zone. Brian Daboll rips him. Jones basically, from that point until yesterday, didn't make a mistake. Didn't throw any interceptions. He threw a couple of balls where he could have been picked. But think about the effect. Jones improved because his coach told him that his play was unacceptable. I don't get that vibe from Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh comes off as one of these new age, I'm always going to be a player's coach, I'm going to pat him on the back. They don't need to be patted on the back. You're going to lose the other players in the locker room. If I was another player on the Jets, I would be looking sideways at Zach Wilson. And honestly, bro, can you just admit it was you yesterday? Do you really have to stand there and say, oh, no, I don't think it was me. It's team. No, don't tell me the team, bro. Don't tell me the team. The team didn't hold you to 3 points. The team didn't have you throwing the ball 10 yards over guys' heads. The team didn't have you throwing the ball in the dirt. The team didn't have you misreading a post route for an out route, all that crap. I mean, that's not the team. That's you. You and the offensive coordinator. And if I'm the owner of the Jets, I wake up and I'm firing somebody today. And I'm telling Robert Saleh that you're next if you don't adjust. Because the worst thing in the world is to sit there and do the same thing over and over again. That's the worst. That's not a Hall of Fame quarterback. That's not, John Elway back there where you're going to say, well, even if he doesn't play well, we know what he can do, so we got to ride it out. Nah, you don't ride anything. You don't ride anything. I know things look bleak, but there's a couple things we got to take away. And I'll try to end on a positive note here. Number one I'll get back to the Giants now. For the Giants, what you have to take away is this: you found a coach, you found a GM. You started out this year, you put them in a terrible spot because of the previous regime, and they've made a lot with what they've had. You got to feel good about where you're going forward from this point. Evaluating players, having a chance to work over the next year or two to clean up the cap space so that you have the money to bring in players when you need to bring in players. You have a full year to draft players. You could fully prepare for the future. The future is bright, whether that includes or does not include Daniel Jones. I think Jones is back next year, but I don't think it's a long-term deal. Same thing with Barkley. Now, this season, it's all about preparing for the future. I know you're still 7-3. So I know you say, well, look, you're 7-3. How are you going to tap out on the season? Unfortunately, it's more about the division, right? Washington's on fire. They're only like a game and a half behind now, right? And you got to play them twice. They're getting hot and healthy as you're getting cold and injured. Dallas just came off a big win in Minnesota. It's a tall task to beat them in Dallas, although that's the kind of game Dallas loses. Then you still have to play the Eagles. That's going to be tough, period. So the division itself could be the biggest hindrance to this team being able to stay in the race with all the injuries. I just don't think they can overcome everything, although I think it's been a great effort and the future is very bright. For the Jets, it's not about the future, it's about today. They have young players and all that, but the NFL doesn't reward long-term building because you can't hold on to all your talent. Guys become free agents, and you can't just sign everybody. It's not like baseball where if you have the money, you can keep your players. In football, you can't just keep everybody. So the young core that the Jets have right now defensively, it will not be intact in 2 or 3 years. This is the window. The window is now. Make the run now. Make the move now. It's unfortunate you can't just go out and buy yourself a quarterback because Lord knows they need it. You know, I was even thinking that if the Colts, who 2 weeks ago it looked like Matt Ryan was on the outs, if the Colts were getting ready to give up on Matt Ryan, maybe the Jets, could have worked something out to bring a guy like that in if they have more faith in him than what they have in Flacco. But, I think it's got to be Flacco or Mike White at least the next game or so to see if you can get more out of this offense. I don't think that's unreasonable. I really don't. I don't think it's an unreasonable ask for the Jets to say, we're going to let Flacco or Mike White play because of how things have gone down with Zach Wilson. So, is the season over for New York football? Partially. I think expectations are going to change for the Giants because of injuries and the division. I think for the Jets, they're not a last place team, but they're in last place. So it's a really tough fight because of how good the division is. But the Jets have to get themselves corrected offensively. You have to be competent. You have to score 10 to 20 points a game. It's the modern NFL. You can't have a day where you have 6 yards of offense in the second half. That's embarrassing. So we'll see what's gonna happen with these teams. It's a short week for the Giants. It's going to be interesting development this week for the Jets, and we'll just go from there. We'll have more ranting and raving from me, I'm sure, at some point over the next couple days. But just my quick hit thoughts about those two teams and where things are. Unfortunately for them, it's not a game, but for me, it's always fun and games here in the Corner Arcade.